Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Got Therapy, question mark, by the way. This is a show that comes to you each week from Columbus State Television. I'm Michael Baltimore, and I'm here with Dr. Dan Rose, the director of the Counseling Center here at Columbus State University. Dan, how are you doing today?
I have to issue a bit of an apology. I
Okay.
am, as you can see, I'm a tad disheveled.
Yes, what happened?
I
No, this is not going to be right, but go ahead.
No. Well, I was looking. We're thinking about buying this house.
Okay, all right.
And anybody out there, you have like the home guy come and look at the house and tell you what the problems are.
Oh,
You want to
yes.
go there, you
You
want to
definitely
follow the
wanna
guy
do that.
around, and you want to like
Absolutely.
climb in the basement, and you want to like climb on the roof with a guy. You
Go
want
in
to
the
do all that
attic
stuff.
and you want to
You
make
do all
sure-
that. So I've been climbing around, whatever. At one point, and this is you're not going to believe this. At one
Okay.
point in the basement, I was crawling around a foot of rat feces. It was
Okay, did that make you, change your mind about the house, or is that
no,
that's
because
something we can take care of?
people don't realize this. Rats have good taste. If that many rats like that house, that's a plus.
We have to talk after the show
I'm
about your
thinking, yeah.
decision making on that house.
I'm thinking,
there. I'm wondering about
If it's
that.
good enough for a couple of hundred rats, because it had to be a couple of hundred rats. In fact, I saw
That's
a rat
awful.
there, size
That
of a
is-
pony. I mean, it was a rat the size of a pony.
is
I could have,
awful. And that's an awful way to start the show, too, by the way.
But here's a
because I
great-
don't know where.
Here's a
how we
great
can
thing
pull
about the
ourselves
rat
out.
the size of a pony. If it bites you, you can ride it to the doctor. I mean,
There's
it's-
always a positive out of these.
I'm
kind
like
of
that.
things.
I find.
I know. Ladies and gentlemen, we
find,
just talk about anything on this show. So, but we're also going to talk about mental health a little bit today. Just before the show, we were talking about some of these personality disorders, these things that really kind of separate people from the norm. And there's a list of symptoms of these personality disorders. We're actually talking about the borderline personality disorder. It has to do with the difficulty in relationships that these people have and presenting issues for
I don't
not
have that
only
problem.
themselves but for the people surrounding them. Can you talk a little bit about what your definition is of the borderline? What is it?
Well, the first place to start, we talk about diagnosis. It's really important to remember that people are verbs, not nouns.
Okay.
So, for instance, someone can have a diagnosis, severe relational conflict, but if the context and the system is right, they may be asymptomatic.
Okay.
So, what's very important about a personality disorder, it's very much affected by relational externals and context.
Okay.
So,
Good to know.
one way I think about it, in my end, psychoanalytic end,
Okay.
is that a person, all of us, we have feelings, emotions, affect. We have to find some way to be able to do something with it, Like an
Absolutely.
example would be like you, like for instance, I just got through this house thing.
Okay.
So I'm meeting the home inspector. The first
Right.
time I come to meet him, I shake his hand. I have certainly entered into a relationship, temporary as it might be, with another human being.
Right.
That generates within me a whole bunch of different things, as it would anybody. It's him as well. So at that moment, there's a collision of two personalities, two nervous systems, and how the two of us navigate that says something about the way in which we are, the genetic as well as the developmental things that have occurred that help us build a sense of self. So there's two nervous systems with a history, both genetic and historical, coming together going boom,
Right.
just for a brief moment. Someone who has a personality disorder, when we talk about borderline, narcissistic, whatnot, in that collision, they can generate a level of affect dysregulation. They begin to feel things that they don't really know what to do with. Now, everybody feels things in that collision. There's always, my man Bion says, whenever two people meet, there's an emotional storm. But someone with a personality disorder, their boat leaks. Their capacity to be able to navigate the waves can be, and usually because there's a genetic pull as well as developmental traumas, all that sort of stuff. So in some ways, they are ill-equipped to weather the storm of any emotional meeting.
So, for the person without the personality disorder, I assume that what people usually do is regulate the affect in some way, that we manage our ups and downs, our anger and all of the other kinds of things that we do throughout our lives. But it's regulated to a certain extent, and we can control that. to a certain extent. I mean, that's
Well-
maybe a definition of mental health in some ways.
And in the collision I just had with the home dude, both of us used humor
Right.
to be able to navigate whatever tensions whatever static charge there were within the two of us sort of initially colliding. So you have this humor, you have the capacity to be able to reflexively, usually unconsciously, make note of the emotional experience you're having and do something with it to maintain a narcissistic equilibrium, meaning that I'm okay, he's okay.
Okay.
And
All right,
we
there
do
you go.
things reflexively to make me okay and him okay. And you can almost think about the different varieties of personality disorder as how you navigate the I'm okay, you're okay. With some personality disorders, I'm not okay and they're really okay. So I suck, you don't suck.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was some where I suck and you suck, we all suck.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's where I don't suck and you really suck.
Right.
And particularly with the borderline, I think what you can often find is sort of an oscillation of those two. There's a level of disequilibrium where it can switch to where who sucks can change in a matter of minutes. And I think that's what can make borderline personality disorder so difficult for the people who suffer from it, but also from those who have to deal with them.
Right. It is about the people around that person because of that dysregulation, that disequilibrium, and it seems very volatile in a way that a person can quickly kind of move to one emotional state and another, and it's chaotic, it's unstable in a way.
And it can be, you know, and I use this word, and I use it it's going to sound pejorative, but all of us are capable of crazy. Crazy is, being verbs, we can easily move into crazy. Nobody is immune to it. What can happen with someone who has some affect dysregulation, and all of us can move to that space, you know, like if, I don't know, if something bad happens to you, you know, your favorite football team loses, for a brief moment, you can move into a state that's affective dysregulated, and you may do something to discharge that or to maintain that equilibrium. You might, I don't know, punch the FSU fan right next to you, know?
Okay, oh,
and
yes.
I mean, that sort of stuff happens.
It could be that.
But whatever you do, it may affect the people around you, and crazy can literally be catching.
Okay, there's some contagion with
Right,
this.
it really is. And you know, we were talking earlier about how, particularly in certain systems, and it can be a family system, but where like there's an adolescent, or one member of the family has an emotional disturbance, and how the whole system is affected. But workplace is where it can really affect you. If you have a colleague, or worse, in fact, the worst possible thing is if you have a boss or someone in charge of you who has a borderline disorder or has a personality disorder. I mean, it literally changes the landscape, and it can generate a storm of crazy, a cascading storm of crazy that is, you know, and what often happens when, and I've done a little bit of consulting work around this, not a lot, but some, you know, you often, one of the first things you have to do is you have to be able to rescue some of the people from crazy and let them know that they're not.
Right.
I mean, that's the first step toward being able to point out and say, wait a minute, this, you know, and I know I talk about a lot of this on the show, but this notion of mindfulness is very important, and it's very important when you're working with or directly affected by someone who has a personality disturbance, because if you can be mindful, you can not catch the crazy, you know? So, and that report...
It's contagion in a way, but the person may not know it's happening.
And that's what a mindfulness comes in.
Yes.
You know, we're given emotions for a reason, and it's supposed to tell us something about our internal state as it's being affected by external states. And so if you find yourself getting really, really angry, if you can be mindful, you can say, wait a minute, what is this? You can step back and allow yourself to experience that and then do something with it, as opposed to be reflexively destabilized by it and then simply acting instead of thinking. You want to be able to have what they call in some areas a bi-hemispheric event. I want to both think and feel. I want to use as much as my cognitive and affective capacity to be able to connect with and move through these moments of potential crazy.
Right. Well, that certainly makes sense. But it seems also that the person with this disorder, with this personality type, when when other people in external situations are suddenly becoming volatile and emotional and affective, jumping all around, it may do something for the person. Does it calm them down?
Yeah, we talked about this before too. There's this notion, and it's sometimes a very difficult notion to grasp, and in some ways it's relatively metaphoric. But there's a notion in psychoanalytic circles of projective identification, and it's a way of sort of handing someone else your affect state. And what often happens with someone who has a personality disorder, for instance, it's easier to detect, let's say, a narcissist, because if a narcissist enters a room, they may appear to feel as if they are the greatest person in the world, but in fact it's the opposite. But what they do is they find a way to be able to get people around them to feel less than, and then they feel okay. So they've actually given their sense of insecurity, and they've projected it out, and someone else has then introjected it. It becomes theirs. And then the narcissist feels okay. And part of working with personality disorders as a therapist, and maybe even in other situations, but is to be able to find a way to slowly but surely give that back. To be able to say to someone, say the narcissist, to be able to say, you know, you were trying very hard to, as my grandmother would say, polish mud. And
like that.
yeah,
That's great.
if we can stop you to polishing it, you can realize it's mud and you can wash it off. But at this point, you are reflexively doing something, and that may require me to be able to first notice what they've given me,
Right.
and then be able to find a way to chew it up and give it to them in a way they may be able to hear. And that can take a long time. And it requires co-construction. It requires two people to be able to navigate this, and me and him or her to be able to generate the sort of language we can begin to talk about their states. That doesn't make it worse, because you can imagine if somebody feels that they suck and they're trying to get you to feel that, if you give it to them wrong, they really can get upset.
Right.
I mean, it can really generate even more. They become more defensive, they become intractable, or they could even fall to pieces. So you have to be sort of, you know, you got to navigate that.
Yeah, it seems to be very volatile at times, but what you're saying is the people on the outside of this really need to use this mindfulness that you brought up on the show a number of times now, and kind of regroup and look at what's happening to them, and then plan sort of the strategy. Well, getting back to treatment for a moment, it seems like this is not something that's going to, the cure for this is not going to be a very quick cure. It's going to take a while, and there's limit setting, and there's also some very active interventions that might go on. Talk about treatment for just a minute. What would you do if you had this borderline in your office? Where would you start, and what would be the plan?
Well, I think right now there are sort of three major treatments that sort of hover on the horizon. With the cognitive behavioral therapy has sort of a hegemonic sort of grip in psychology at the moment. So there's a dialectical behavioral therapy, Marsha Linehan, that in some ways borrows, I think, pretty heavily from some psychoanalytic constructs. That's one way, and originally that was thought of as maybe a brief or briefer treatment, but as her research has grown, it's not a brief treatment. It's much more structured. It involves some social learning stuff. It's much more prescriptive, and it actually sort of works on the skills. The other two are the big sort of schools of thought in psychoanalytic areas are the Kernberg and the Kohut schools, and they don't call that anymore, but the Kernberg would be much more like a limit setting. It can be a bit more confrontational. It can be much more process-focused. The Kohut version is a much more sort of, it's almost humanistic in its approach. It's much more generating an environment and being much more, as opposed to working necessarily with limit setting or with confrontation, being able to give back the affect. So if you had someone from a coaching perspective who comes into your office, you would want to reflect back to them, you know, you're feeling a little uncomfortable meeting me for the first time.
Okay. Well, what would you do? It's uncomfortable. You know, I've heard the stories too that in therapy, particularly if a borderline personality disorder comes in, they're going to skip the introductions, and they're going to become very close. There's going to be a quick development of a relationship, maybe too quick, and then maybe somewhere down the road they're going to have the opposite. So they're infatuated with you at the beginning, at the end they can't stand you and you're terrible, and drop out of therapy as a result of that.
Well, one of these, and this sort of came a little more from the Cohusian school, but contemporary thought is very much systemic. There's no sort of, this notion of the isolated mind is sort of antiquated in a way. So a lot of contemporary theory would say that. And there's a guy by the name of Robert Stallero, who I think I'm going to hang out with, or he's going to be presenting at a conference. I'm going to be presenting it in a couple of weeks, which I have. It's, but Stallero says there's no such thing as a borderline, just a bad therapist. And what he means
there we go.
is that if someone who has this disorder splits and suddenly makes you the greatest therapist in the world, you may want to ask yourself, how are you feeding that? And what are you doing to sort of initiate this need for splitting? And so part of what occurs in that in contemporary therapy is sort of think about if someone who has this disorder suddenly moves to a narcissistic space or suddenly becomes into this space where they're idealizing you, the question to ask is, what's going on? How are we co-creating this? And sometimes you can do some pretty interesting interventions to be able to point it out directly to them, or at least to yourself, to be able to generate a space where, you know, that doesn't necessarily have to happen.
Wow, so the therapist really has to be on their toes somewhat to, I mean, because after all, if a client comes in, a new client comes in, and they talk about how wonderful you are, really before they know you.
Well, I mean, if they tell me how wonderful I am, they know me. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
if
yeah,
somebody says to me, "You're wonderful," I'm thinking, "You know me."
For the rest of us, you know, that's too soon to really make that kind of assumption and start into that process. So that's a moment of reflection for the therapist to really kind of look at and see if that might be an indication too that this person has something.
Yeah, there's Kernberg has all this sort of ways of being able to, as part of an interview, you ask people, you know, tell me about your mom and your dad. And if someone says, well, my mom's the greatest person in the world, you know, my dad's horrible. That there are cognitive, you can listen for the ways in which people split and they separate the world into good and bad, and you can see where it gets them in trouble. Freud said that the essence of mental health is a capacity for ambivalence, and that's the way to be able to see in shades of gray.
Well, you mentioned several times splitting. So there are different definitions of splitting. Sometimes I've heard that this means that externally the borderline, for example, may split two people that are in their hemisphere and have them angry with each other or distancing from each other, and therefore that self-soothes the borderline, but then all that contagion continues and there are problems outside. But that's one idea of splitting. Tell us about splitting.
Well, splitting can be a defense, or it can be a systemic action. And particularly when you work in psychiatric hospitals and whatnot, we'd always talk about you'd have to keep people together so you'd avoid splitting among the patients because, like you said, but in a work environment as well, it's where you have work environments often go very well as long as one person is the one who sucks. Like if you have the one guy that everybody thinks is screwing up.
So the scapegoat.
He has, and that's an element of splitting too. And there's a way in which suddenly, there are favored people and not so favored people in a work environment. That generates a splitting, and it really creates what Volkan is a guy who talked about this. It creates a borderline system or a borderline space, and he sort of likes to think that people can actually generate almost a personality system that mimics. There could be a narcissistic space generated. There's also an internal splitting, which is a defense. And it's a way of, sort of I was talking before about you suck, I suck, and whatnot. It's a way of separating out certain things and not having to deal with them directly. If you're a child and your parents are acting like yahoos and you say to yourself, I must be a bad child, that's splitting because it saves your parents from having to think about your parents as out of control and the world being out of control, and you become the one that's bad. There are other elements of splitting too that you sort of do as you move about the space.
Well, I'd also heard along this same notion of splitting, and you said just a moment ago, you said it could be external, it could be internal in a way, that if the conflict is outside of the person, I'm making somebody else crazy, if we talked about that a second ago, or there's a problem out there, I'm okay, I'm better.
Yeah,
that tends to be a pattern over time.
It works wonderfully in the short term. As you can imagine, though, it has some serious long-term consequences. One of those is it stops you from learning from experience. To be able to truly learn, I mean, you have to be able to assimilate or accommodate, and both of those require capacity for ambivalence. And just in terms of, from when we look at learning theory, your capacity to be able to integrate an event and to be able to integrate it as something that you sort of add to what you already know, or if it causes a really restructuring in the system, it requires you first move to this ambivalent space to be able to see it in complexity, to be able to see yourself in some complexity. And splitting is a primitive defense. It works really wonderfully immediately, but long term, it keeps someone stuck in a relational pattern that does not allow for growth.
Right, and so the relationships of this personality disorder, this borderlines we talked about here, it must be a very rocky series of relationships with a lot of other people, maybe multiple marriages, maybe other work, like you mentioned, work environment, that kind of thing. Might be some more
polygamy.
problems. Yes.
Actually, and
I'm
maybe
not
it's
sure that made my point, but yeah, that was a good joke for a second.
And I got to end here in a sec, just because I gotta go wash off. Did I mention the rat feces?
Yes, you did.
Okay,
As a matter of fact, that's how we started this.
The whole thing,
so
right?
it's very
But
interesting.
at some point, we ought to talk. When you talk about this whole notion of polygamy,
Yes.
the whole notion of the polyvalent or polygot self, because the other thing that sort of compounds this notion of borderline and whatnot, to be a verb is to be multiple. And so we are many things at many times. And what often happens with someone who is, this is sort of a contemporary sort of way of thinking about personality disorders, as opposed to having a team, you have a riot inside your head. And you are many in such a way that is very counterproductive, as opposed to a many that allows you to be able to move and change in ways that you need to in each sort of context. We should talk about that. And
Yeah,
and that
makes
movie that's Inside Llewyn Davis, which we
Yes.
saw together.
Yeah, we saw that. Yeah,
we
so it was
saw
a
that
good
together. We shared
we're
a
making that real
huge,
quick. This is not a
huge
movie
thing of popcorn.
review show. However,
Big
but
bucket of popcorn.
it was a lot of popcorn going on.
That was
in
big.
that
We ate a lot of
movie, but,
popcorn.
Set back in
Gets in my teeth.
In the 60s. We don't want to talk. We'll talk again about that one. I'm
Okay,
sure.
we should talk about Llewyn. Next time we talk about Llewyn Davis, Inside Llewyn Davis, we could talk about it in turn. You guys watch it if anybody's watching this.
Okay.
Which,
all right. Here, point to camera 2 over
point to
here.
camera.
This
Go
one,
watch
Omar, if
Llewyn
you got
Davis. We're going to
camera
talk about
2 there.
Llewyn Davis.
All right, there you go.
It goes on red when it comes on. I just noticed that.
It finally does over there. That's really good. All right, this has been good today. We talked about personality disorders and some of the dynamics and all of that. This goes
Some people
on
say
and
I'm a
so
tad
forth.
narcissistic. I don't believe it.
You don't believe them? Then you are. Then
Maybe
you are,
that's
very
it.
much so.
I
All
think,
right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. This has been Got Therapy. I'm Michael Baltimore. This is Dr. Dan Rose here, and the television studios at Columbus State University. Watch each week. By the way, you are now on iTunes, my friend, so people can watch us on the podcast. Go to
you can get a little
iTunes.
Kanye and you can get some me.
A little,
How about that?
of that at iTunes. Just type in CSU TV.
You like that,
and you can
Kanye?
find us. We can talk about that on another show because we need to end. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time right here on Got Therapy.
Kim Kardashian. That's who he's married to.
So I've heard.